Ticket Volume brings you a service management consultant who's spent over 15 years in the construction industry doing everything from testing to service desk to service delivery and into services director roles. Our guest today has also served a short stint at CSC. Welcome to Ticket Volume, news and information for improving IT experiences. I'm your host, Matt Darren, and this podcast is powered by InvGate, a global leader in IT service and asset management software. As you know, every week I chat with different IT leaders to share insights on service management, technology, business, anything else we get distracted with, and this episode is no exception. But before we start, I want you to consider subscribing, consider liking this podcast or commenting or sharing with a friend. All those things that we want you to do and mention at the beginning of every YouTube video and every podcast. Instead, though, for now, let's begin. Welcome to Ticket Volume, Darren Rose.
Good afternoon, Matt. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. It's always good to have blokes from across the pond on. It's always good to just remember that our community is global. It's kind of interesting. I get a lot of different perspectives around the world, and people, the guests that are on, mention that ITSM has different maturities all across the world. Kind of interesting to think about how some countries are ahead of others and different regions are ahead of others. It's different in other regions. But one thing that I did notice with you is that you're always commenting on my ESM stuff, and you're always like, that is clearly something that you're very passionate about. So talk about it a little bit. How did you get into ESM? Is it what you focus on?
So I did start stalking you. And then liking all your ESM posts. But for me, I think, when I started out at CSC, working on service desk and all that kind of stuff was my first introduction to like ITIL. And kind of then that's kind of really what got me hooked around the sort of service management aspects.
Same.
And then what, like you said, I've spent 15 years, working in the construction industry. And throughout that time, I was kind of lucky to kind of get our ITIL and our ITSM practices, mature into a right level, where it was like, well, what's the next kind of logical step?
Mm-hmm.
And, thankfully we'd kind of built a reputation of being able to do good service and kind of, user experience. We use a real key driver around user experience to then build that reputation that allowed us to kind of go into the rest of the business and say, have you thought about doing service management slightly differently? So that was working with things like the HR departments, finance, supply chain, consider how they approach service management. And, was there a way to join up all of those, as I like to put, joining up the silos, so that from an end user point of view, it was more of a seamless experience around how they got service and support. And then so obviously that's very much the ESM kind of approach. And I'll always take the opportunity to anyone that will listen to me is talk about ESM, or whether it's just, a service management focused approach, whatever we want to call it. I know ESM is kind of like the name that it gets, but really for me, it's just about what's the approach to service management. And how do we all do it?
Yeah. That transition is so strange, how we went from ITSM to ESM. It really doesn't quite make sense to say enterprise service management either, right? It almost kind of bothers me.
Yeah. And I think, and again, one of the key things is that a lot of the tools have kind of latched onto that as well, though. So, it's now we're an ESM tool and we're this, whereas the tool's only part of it, again, so it's actually, it's more about the culture as well. Are your organization sort of structured to be able to deliver it? Do you have the right people in the right roles? Is it right funding? All of that sort of stuff that's key to actually making ESM happen. That I think it's more just about, I don't want the tools to kind of steal the badge, it's not their thing necessarily to own, because it is just about a bigger picture to service management.
Exactly. And it's all the stuff that you mentioned in your first introduction. You mentioned you were lucky enough to see the service management progress, to mature, to grow, to evolve. And you talked about reputation. Another thing that is necessary to have to get these silos to come together. If you don't have those two things, you're missing out on really understanding the perspectives, the the roadblocks you're going to hit,
Yeah.
the challenges you're going to have to overcome, because those are the techniques that you need to develop. e- Whether it's in IT or HR or finance, you're going to hit similar boundaries and have to overcome them. So, what do you think is one of the biggest boundaries to two organizations starting an ESM journey?
Um, well, I think as with all these things, everyone thinks their problem is different, but it's always the same. And
Yeah.
when you actually get to kind of look at it, and just thinking about, even with IT departments, when you introduce a new tool or you introduce new things, it's like, oh, we don't work like that. It won't support because we do this. We're different because we do it. And yet virtually it's the same. And then when you approach different teams, the first thing they'll often say is, not sure that'll work for us because we do it. And a lot of the time it's just the way people phrase it and kind of their own perception of things. Whereas actually when you really just break it down and have extended conversations with people, to kind of really get to the crux of it, we might call things an incident, but for HR or a different team, it's not, so they kind of need to use their own language and work out what that is. And working in construction, for example, if we say incident outside of IT, that means a very different thing, and that's normally like a health and safety type issue or something like that. So, once you kind of break down those sort of language barriers and actually kind of get down to the crux of what we actually mean, then you can kind of get people on board because they realize that actually we've all got similar problems, and therefore the barriers, a lot of them are just barriers of perception. Ultimately, normally is what it is.
Yeah. Political barriers.
Yeah. And there's always a fear for some people thinking around, I sort of mentioned silos. I mentioned silos quite a bit really in terms of my thinking, because people like to hold on to their knowledge, which is what built the silos, and they don't want to feel like they're losing control of that. And that something's going to come along and just take all that knowledge away. And, knowledge workers in particular, that's our collateral a lot of the time, is what we know is why I'm here. So a lot of people have a lot of kind of, they attach their worth to their knowledge. And so, one of the big things for me is actually how do we join up those silos, not aim to destroy them, to steal one of your things to put a roof over the silos, right? So it's how do we join them up? And make us more of a collective rather than trying to, and appreciating the knowledge and the skill that is in all of those silos, and they exist for a reason, and to respect those.
Bingo.
And to just join it up.
Excellent. And I love the idea. Steal my ideas, love them. Because push those silos together. They can still be silos. You actually came up with the idea. You said to maintain some aspects of those silos is necessary, because you're asking too much for them to remove everything and go, all in ESM is very difficult to do. Oftentimes you don't have the political capital to do that. And you don't have someone who can lead the way and actually.
No, I think, you're in a much easier position if you're starting that from scratch, but how many companies are really starting from scratch at that level, to have that as their main reason for doing what they do. So you're always working against history and experience and all that sort of stuff. And that just takes time. It's a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless you're lucky enough to work for a service management platform, in which case they're probably already using their tool. HR is like, oh, I can totally get my hands on. No, licenses don't cost anything. You can do whatever you want. Of course you can have ESM there. So you said that you've experienced this in the past. What sort of departments were at the companies that you worked at? What departments do you see being the most popular service management candidates?
So it's always looking at those opportunities where the ideal candidates are where there are processes that are cross-functional. So where there's links directly into IT. So often things like HR, there's an obvious link there in terms of some processes need both teams. So for me, those are the ones, because actually from an end user, and that's always, end user first with all of this stuff, is if they're engaged with two different teams to get the same offering at the end, the same thing that they need, the same requirement, then actually if we can remove that two team aspect and then you go to one team or one portal, then that's going to get the most benefit, I think, because it's about, from an end user point of view, so how do I remove those blockers and just make it easy for them? so that they don't, they're not thinking about who do I need to contact to get what I need. It's just, I just put a request in and whoever delivers it, and I get it. And that's kind of the message that I try to sell to people around that is, from an end user point of view, they don't need to know. They don't need to know that they need to email Mary to get this particular action done or whatever it is. They just request it. The work is done. The work's sequenced and orchestrated in the background, and they just at the end get what they need, get the outcome that they were after.
Yeah. I think this is key for people that are trying to like get into this and you see the opportunities. There's the obvious ones, like you just pointed out, the HR one it's so obvious, but there may be less obvious ones like finance. It might just be something like general ledger stuff or month end stuff. It's stuff that IT works on that's finance related, but not necessarily.
Those
are your inroads. You're looking for those projects.
All this kind of stuff that as a finance company, they're transactions that they need to do. And sometimes there might be an approval process linked to some of those things. Again, the tool sets are perfect for getting approvals, and visibility. And the one thing that is good, obviously, with most of the platforms is the reporting element. So I just need to know what the demand is on my team. I need to be able to assess that. So that just feeds into the bigger MI picture around information that managers have to make good decisions, right? So it's all part of that.
Yes, I love that. And I think this is one of the reasons that I'm so excited about value chains, or whatever all the other ITIL 4 terms that are related to value. It seems to be that next level of thinking beyond processes living in specific silos. Like what you said, people keep their knowledge because they're afraid that sharing it is going to make their job irrelevant or whatever. I feel like if we can get to the point where people see the value coming out of sharing their knowledge, they can start to realize how they're impacting revenue and how there's plenty of knowledge to get. And the same thing, with these finance systems or with HR, we know what value people are trying to get out of these multi-silo processes, and we know what value people are trying to achieve. Can we start actually thinking about it this way? Can we start visualizing it this way so that they don't need help finding the return on investment, or they don't need help being convinced, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say for people that are trying to convince others in their organization? Like, what do they need to do to make progress?
That's a big question, isn't it? I think the gatekeepers are different when we're talking about ESM. So that's really kind of tapping into people like COOs, et cetera, where they maybe have more of a broader holistic view of what's needed for the business. So that it's not an IT director that you're trying to, convince that it needs to be done. So there is definitely a different audience that we need to be engaging with when talking about ESM. There are opportunities as well for things like maybe aspirational CIOs and CTOs to consider actually, by moving away from an IT director role, have a bigger impact on the group. And, maybe that's another way in for them to kind of sort of broach that subject around ESM. But I think that we should be looking out for other indicators within the business, whether that's around employee engagement, user experience, especially now that, everyone's, we've moved from where we're all located in major offices to now everyone being remote, and, we've removed a lot of those links that would be, I'm just going to walk over to the IT department. I'm just going to go upstairs. All of that is now, in most cases, is changed. The game's changed in that respect. So we need to look at different ways of managing those requests and actually how we can, work in a new way, which is, for me, is about how, we've got to move that digital transformation aspect around service to support the new way of working. I don't like that phrase, since the pandemic, but it's true, the fact that things have changed beyond what they were sort of 2.5 years ago. And we need to adapt. And I do think that the ESM is a great way to join employees up. It's a great way to, as a business, to understand what my employees need and kind of serve their needs and make sure that we're keeping them as productive and efficient as they need to be by removing blockers and making sure that they do need something, they have a clear line of sight to where to go to get it, and it gets delivered to them.
Yeah. That's such a good point. You know, that is one of the positive aspects of having service management, just having it anywhere in your
Yeah.
organization. It does empower you to adapt to those situations. That's such a good way of putting it.
Yeah. And, through the pandemic, the teams that we'd recently moved onto our service management platform, they themselves were like, if we were just 6 months late with doing this, their ability to be able to react to the constantly changing, dynamics of what was happening in terms of procedures, etc. They were almost like, we don't think we would have been able to do it without having taken a different approach to how we manage our work. I'd love to say it was planned, but obviously just pure luck. But it does support a new way of working, and it just means that they can manage those workloads in a very different way compared to what we were doing, like I said, 2.5 years ago. So, yeah.
Yes. Oh man, I love that. Rob England would eat this episode up because this is what he's talking about all the time, is being able to adapt. You said, I wish it were like we predicted this, and that we would know that this is where we were headed and why we were investing in it. But we can't predict the future. We don't know how bad the flu is going to be in 2023. We don't know what the next pandemic is going to be. We don't know the financial markets are going to be stable for another year. And so having these things in place, having the processes and people and experience in place allows you to adapt and to, scale up and scale down.
Yeah. And it is that agility, that is the key part to ESM, venture service management, where that's just in an IT department, having that agility that's enabled through, good processes, the way of working, all of those things clearly established, knowledge sharing, reporting, all of those, the ITIL processes in terms of how to describe it, actually how people really do them, which there is a difference. Making sure that you've thought about those things and you got them in place and ready to go. It's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause once you see the outcomes, once you get to the outcomes, then okay. Like, you said it earlier, and I'll steal this one from you then, tit for tat, so to speak, moving from monotony to autonomy.
Yeah.
How in IT, that one of the reasons service management exists is just because we were sick of doing password resets all day.
Yeah.
Sick of doing, I set up another server today. Oh, it's the exact same image as I did yesterday. Like, it's so monotonous in so many things we do. So how can we automate that? How can we streamline that? I really like the way that you think about ESM, because I see this in your posts. You're always talking about, you always bring it back to the experience, which I think is not only trendy, it's not only the reason that you should be looking at this, but I think it's a great way to just to pick it apart and to identify the opportunities and gaps. You use this term service touchpoints. So talk about that a little bit. What do you think about, like, what is the opportunity? Why do we need to think about them in service touchpoints?
Yeah. And I think, so when I'm talking about service touchpoints as well and the experience, I like to break it down to two types. So there's the user and there's the employee. So there's the person consuming the service and the person delivering the service. And it's important for me, obviously, to consider both, so there's no point in having a great user experience if your employees are manually doing every task in the background and it's a drag, it's hard work. So I think having those service touchpoints, those interaction touchpoints, all the ITIL processes and all that stuff in the world, great, gives you a framework, but with service design, it's those touch points and every interaction, those are the things that will make a service satisfying to use or not satisfying to use. They're the things that will keep people coming back, or whether they consider you're good at what you do or you're not good at what you do. Mm-hmm. It's the reasons why people might pick you over a competitor, is those touch points. So getting those right and really understanding what they are, when they happen, what we expect to happen at those touch points is really key. And the same for the employee experience in terms of, actually, you sort of touching on the word autonomy, in terms of things like intrinsic motivators that we have as workers. The three things we always talk about are autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Yeah.
And for me, if you do ESM right, it gives you all those things, because they have the autonomy to make the right decisions and do the right things, because, that's what you've taught them to do. the mastery element comes from they're not doing repetitive work because we automate it. So let's make our knowledge workers actually, giving advanced knowledge and helping with complex issues, and then give people a purpose, which is all about service. So if you tandle those things up, you can get a really motivated workforce to really drive forward your service. And then it kind of looks after itself in a way, right? If you have a good engaged workforce that are motivated to deliver good service, it makes those interactions with the users are always positive. Again, it's kind of that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy type stuff where it just keeps going. And like I said, with the service management thing, if you get that right, you can really hit those intrinsic motivators for your employees, which, at the moment, it's difficult to retain staff in some areas and all those kind of things. So again, talking about those ins, about what the sorts of conversations actually improving your employee experience is also a key out for me from doing service management right.
Yeah.
So
yeah, move away from that monotony, give them purpose, help them feel
and let them
valued.
make the right choices for themselves. So,
Exactly.
what is the right call to make? Let them do it because you've set everything up right so that they can do it and they've got all the right information to be able to make those right choices without having to double check or approve or, escalate up everything because you're not sure what to do. So, yeah.
Even though it drives Daniel Breston insane every time that I say it, this is the enablement that we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is literally like, I'm doing this work. I'm totally bored doing this work. Let me automate it. Help me make it less monotonous. Let me add light into this. Let me make my job and the customer's experience that much better.
Yeah.
It takes so much trust and cycles, but you're right. This is how you improve the perceptions of your business. This is how you improve culture. This is how you improve knowledge sharing, is you make it easy. You make it fun. You make it youthful and show people the value of it. Such good points, Dan. You really know your stuff. Where can people connect and learn more?
And LinkedIn is probably my main output. So look me up. I'm just Darren Rose on there. Ball guy glasses, so easy to find by the profile picture. So just hit me up and drop me a message if you've got any questions or want to know a little bit more. That's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us on Ticket Volume.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me, mate.
And to our audience, thanks for listening to this episode. We've got a bunch more coming. There's a bunch more in the backlog. We're almost up to 50. We should be 50 soon. So make sure you subscribe to receive an alert every time there's a new episode. You can also submit topics to me. Just get angry on LinkedIn. Send me a message. Tell me what you think is more important than the stuff we're talking about. Bring guests. Who do you actually want us to interview? What are the tough questions you want us to ask? Leave feedback. Do something, because the algorithms will reward us with your interactions. They'll give us more promotion. They'll give us more airtime. Speaking of airtime, the podcast is brought to you by InvGate, the all-in-one IT service and asset management system that helps organizations with world-class IT support. If you're looking for a solution to build your help desk without the headaches of year-long implementations and high total cost of ownership, you are going to love InvGate. In fact, IT teams from NASA, Toyota, McDonald's, they all use InvGate to manage requests, automate workflows, and centralize inventory data. Some of them even do ESM, so they can focus on delivering better service. Because remember, good service is good business.